Welcome back to the show. I open the floor for the journalists to pose their questions from our guests.
Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka, now yesterday, President Maithripala Sirisena, in his address to the nation, said that Sri Lanka follows the non-aligned foreign policy and that we have made friends and that we don't have enemies. He made a direct contrast between the previous administration and the present-day administration. In your opinion, don't you think this is an admirable feat for the first 100 days?
Well, I wish I could agree, but I can't. Now, I've been one of the sharpest critics of the management of foreign policy by the Rajapaksa administration in its second term on your channel. But the cure has been worse than the disease. As far as non-alignment goes, I would have liked to have seen President Sirisena or the foreign minister attend the jubilee of the Bandung conference, which was the precursor of the non-aligned movement. But President Sirisena didn't attend, and he was represented ably by Dr. Sarath Hammargama, who I wish will be the foreign minister of Sri Lanka, but Sri Lanka foreign minister didn't attend that either. And as far as external relations go, what has happened is for the first time, you have the visiting leader of our great neighbor addressing our parliament and telling us to move beyond the 13th Amendment and flagging federalism. Now, this normally doesn't happen. You don't have neighbors coming over and telling your parliament how you should change your constitution and how you should solve your ethnic problem. You have Secretary of State John Kerry saying when he welcomed Foreign Minister Mangala Samaraweera that Sri Lanka, having waged 30 years of war against the Tamils, and now that has led to Hasina Leelaratne doing up a petition which they presented the State Department protesting against that point of view. Prime Minister David Cameron says he's told President Sirisena that Sri Lanka must fully cooperate with the UN inquiry into so-called war crimes. Ed Miliband says that Britain is determined to, on what he calls Tamil New Year, push for international inquiry into war crimes. Former President Chandrika Kumaratunga tells the DNA in an interview in Dubai that we shall have a domestic inquiry mechanism with the presence and the assistance, of the international community. So I think that we have gone too far in the opposite direction. We have also ruffled the feathers of China, which is the country to which even the United States allies are now moving in economic terms. The US didn't want Britain to join the AIIB, but Britain, France, Europe, they're moving towards China as the source of capital, while we are moving in another direction. Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, writing in the Japan Times, calls it resetting Sri Lanka's strategic position in the world. Now, we needed a rebalance from the
Dr. Jayatilaka, 100 days. Dr. Jayatilaka,
something very, very negative.
Dr. Jayatilaka, 100 days against 2 terms. Can you compare?
Well, if you're making tall claims, you can. If you are far more moderate, I think that's the problem with this administration. It's an unelected government. President is of course elected, but it's an unelected UNP administration trying to do too much too soon.
Are you saying that the president has made a tall claim by saying that we have no, that there are no enemies abroad, and that we have?
Well,
now
I don't think we ever had enemies apart from
no, but I'm saying, are you saying that the president was making a tall claim?
I don't think any government ever said that we had enemies.
Are you saying we had friends?
Other states go, no.
Yeah, by saying that we now have.
But Naveen, when you have friends who come to your parliament and tell you to go beyond the 13th Amendment and talk about federalism, well, that's, with friends like that.
I'd like to ask this from a member of parliament, Deputy Minister Wickremesinghe. Deputy Minister Wickremesinghe, you were in parliament when Prime Minister Modi. How do you see this?
I would not agree with Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka on the comments he made on Sri Lanka's foreign policy, because I believe that our Foreign Minister Mangala Samaraweera and President Maithripala Sirisena have done an admirable job in the first 100 days, particularly on foreign policy. Sri Lanka was getting increasingly isolated. You need to remember, our foreign policy needs to be non-aligned. At the same time, our foreign policy needs to be in the interest of the people of this country. Our foreign policy now goes parallel to our economic policy. Our markets are in the US, our markets are in Europe. We have to protect our markets in the long run. We need to diversify our markets, and I'm in complete agreement with that. But the diversification of markets will take time, and our foreign policy must be aligned to protecting those markets. We lost the GSP. Just in January this year, we were losing our fishing sales markets in Europe. We lost them as well on January 15. We have to regain those. All these are connected foreign policy issues as well. They're not just technical issues, they're foreign policy issues as well. And I think we have done what needs to be done. We have gone to India. The Indian Prime Minister has been here, has been given the honor of addressing the Sri Lankan Parliament. And in the Indian Prime Minister's speech in the Sri Lankan Parliament, we did not feel that this was a new kind of colonialism where India was dictating terms to us. We clearly felt that it was a relationship of equals. The Indian Prime Minister's emphasis was on the economic partnership between the two countries. In fact, at one point in his speech, he said that Sri Lanka could become India's strongest economic partner. So I think we have to build on the positives of this relationship. Our president not only went to India, our president has already been to China, and he has had a good visit in China, despite the fact that we have had to review some projects conducted by Chinese contractors. And I'm drawing a distinction here between the Chinese government and the Chinese contractors. China is an old friend of Sri Lanka. They have stood by this country. Even in the recent past, China has stood by this country. We will build on that relationship. But there is a public demand, particularly in terms of good governance, that we review certain projects. We are reviewing those projects. We have explained our position. And if there are no issues with those projects will continue. But like in every other thing, when we are chasing up corruption, whatever the source of corruption, it has to be dealt with. And I think the Chinese recognize that as well. I think President Maithripala Sirisena's inability to be at the commemorative session of the Bandung conference was purely to do with issues on his calendar. It had nothing to do, and I think you might be able to actually comment a lot more on that.
May I say this? Now, I like to remind what President yesterday said. Some slaves doesn't understand, although they were freed by the system. That is what President said. Now, when you talk about this foreign policy, now we can criticize, but most important thing is to understand the non-alignedness within the context of Indian Ocean. Now, Bandung principle is one thing. Now, non-alignedness which was connected to Bandung belongs to old era. Now, what is relevant now is to explain and qualify the non-alignedness in relation to China and India. That is what our President has done. So, he has shown the importance of equidistance from both interested parties on Sri Lanka. So, therefore, as I fully agree with the Deputy Minister Eran Wickramaratne that is the one thing where we have to proud of, that our foreign policy has been cleared.
I want to question you, Mr. Laktilaka, with regard to the statements made by Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, and even David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, saying that constitutional reforms are needed in Sri Lanka. Can another country decide for a country like ours? Does this not mean that they're trying to infringe on the sovereignty of the country? I
fully agree on that with Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka. Nobody can dictate terms on sovereign countries. We know what to do. But now that is itself an achievement. Now,
how do you view this as achievement?
No. I mean, itself achievement means that we know how the Western countries or India dictated terms on previous regime. Now nobody comes. They may come and say some sort of a rhetorical statement, but nobody presses the present government to do that and this. So that's why I'm saying it itself is a victory and achievement.
Dr. Jayatilaka?
Look, the closest we came to slavery was 30 years under terrorism of Prabhakaran, and it was Mahinda Rajapaksa who liberated us from that slavery. And I can't think of anything more slavish than the reference in the President's speech yesterday to Maharajina. Maharajina of what? I remember when I told President Premadasa that I had been for the Queen's birthday party the previous evening and something happened, he asked me which Queen. Now that was the UNP, that was Sri Lanka. I'm not even talking about Mahinda Rajapaksa. But today what happens? We have, as I said, a Prime Minister from a foreign country coming and telling us here what to do. And the BJP in its annual sessions in Bangalore 2 weeks ago passed a resolution on foreign policy in which it said Prime Minister Modi was the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Jaffna, and he called for Sri Lanka to go beyond the 13th Amendment toward federalism. This is the BJP resolution. We have Tom Malinowski, US Assistant Secretary of State, who visited Sri Lanka, went to the Mullaitivu beach, knelt down and placed a wreath. Now who died on the Mullaitivu beach? It was the Tiger leadership that died on the Mullaitivu beach. We have now moved from the mismanagement of foreign policy in the second term of the Rajapaksa regime to in the opposite direction. Iran was talking about markets. Well, he certainly knows something that Larry Summers, former US Secretary to the Treasury and head of the World Bank, didn't know when he wrote last week, that the US role as the guarantor of the world economy is called into question by the fact that China has set up the AIIB, the bank, and most of the US allies went against the United States in joining that bank.
Dr.
Because
Jayatri,
we have to
you
look
have
at
been-
investment sources, not only markets.
Dr.
Our
Jayatri,
investments come from China.
Dr. Jayatri, we all know about this is in the public domain. You Google it, you have this information available. However, people want to know what's happening in Sri Lanka. You were the ambassador to Geneva for 2 years, and you did a wonderful job with regard to defeating 2 resolutions as well.
Thereafter down.
At that time, in, in 2009. The question is, don't you think this as a victory for the Sri Lankan people, the postponing of this particular reporting question?
Oh, absolutely
How do you
not.
view this?
Absolutely not. I say this not due to speculation. Prince Zaid Al Hussein, the UN High Commissioner, wrote to the President of the Human Rights Council saying that this is a one-time only 6-month postponement because he has every confidence that thanks to the new government, there will be new sources of information which will permit a stronger report to be presented in September.
The previous regime had been trying to do this for many, many years. However, they were not able. They were
that's not true,
successful.
Shamin. That's not true. That's not
Manifesto
true.
itself shows that.
We, in 2009, as you know, we defeated the effort, but the Rajapaksa administration in the second term gummed up the works and our support shrank. But now we don't have a trade-off where we shall do a domestic inquiry and the international inquiry goes away. No, we have given the international inquiry time and space. We have invited, Mandra Samravira has invited the UN working group on disappearances to come to Sri Lanka and gather more information. They're on their way.
No,
So
but
the international report will be stronger.
That is after the presidential commission has been appointed to look into disappearances.
The presidential commission is fine. I'm talking about Mandala's official invitation to the UN working group on disappearances before the September session where the report will be presented. So they can come over here. Mr. Sumandaran has addressed the press conference and said,
Dr.
don't
Jayatri,
worry about the 6 months.
you're pointing
we can
out
get more information out.
You're
So it's
pointing
a
out
stronger international report and a domestic inquiry which according to Chandrika Baranayaka Kumaratunga will have the presence of the international community. So it's not even a trade-off. It's a lose-lose scenario.
Now,
Dr. Jayatri-
Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka is famous for creating doomsday mentality. Now, it's very important to say.
What is the doomsday mentality
Yeah.
I created? I said that your
No.
CFA is not going to work, and I was right.
What I'm
And the
saying-
Tigers went back to war.
Let me explain.
Right? Your
The
P downs, your
president
package.
stand-
I was right on all of those, on the Tigers.
President's stand is.
What is the doomsday
Yeah,
mentality?
let me explain. President's stand is whoever comes and go, we have given an assurance there won't be a international tribunal or whatever to prosecute Sri Lankan people. That is very clear. That was stated in the elections, and also right now it is the policy of the government.
Did he say that to David Cameron? David Cameron says he told the president.
So, this is the official position. And the President Mahinda Rajapaksa as well as we, the present government, even in its manifesto agreed to have a local mechanism. So policy is very clear.
Without international presence.
No, international presence. Even now, if you look at the Maxwell Paranagamma's commission, how many foreign
Those are
nationals are
advisors.
present?
Those are
How
advisors.
advisors. When it comes to
Advisors.
foreign
Advisors.
thing, it's advisors. So This is why I'm
During
saying you are
campaigning,
creating-
Dr. Jayatilaka, the former president said that he would be taken to the electric chair if he was defeated in the elections.
I didn't hear that, and if he said it, I mean, look, I don't know about the electric chair. What I do know is what happened to Milosevic, and that was real. Now, let me just say that I am very glad that in April, May 2009, when David Miliband, Bernard Kouchner came over here to effect a ceasefire and stop the war, and when Hillary Clinton was pushing, and when President Obama said it from the White House lawn, that it was Mahinda Rajapaksa who was here to make the decisions and not any of the present bloc.
Deputy Minister Eran Wickramaratne, bad to worse, the foreign policy. True?
I have to disagree, and I have to completely disagree with even the suggestion that the new government has to do anything with a future United Nations Human Rights Council resolution. As you know, the United Nations processes have been there for a considerable period of time. The only respite that the country got was on the election of a new government. Just on soon after that we didn't really have to face up basically to another resolution, and only the resolution that was passed previously. So clearly there are problems, and our government has been now charged with the situation of actually clearing the problems. That's what has actually befallen us. We didn't create these problems to start with. Whatever those problems that have been created, we are now responsible for cleaning it up, and we shall clean it up. We shall clean it up. I want to say this: the so-called doomsday scenario, right? I see it as far more positive. Here, if there are issues that are not dealt with, issues relating to the war and the LLRC report, the recommendations of it, the undertakings that the previous government gave to the United Nations and to others, we have said over and over again that we are committed to resolving some of these issues through a domestic process. Today, if you look at the newspapers, the foreign minister has said that those domestic processes will be in place by July. Actually, it's in today's papers that statement is there that those processes will be there. We are committed to resolving these things domestically, but we are not afraid. We are not afraid of any kind of international audit. We are not afraid. We have nothing to hide. We are doing things openly, and we are not afraid of that. We have also said. We have also said.
The problem isn't fear. The
Dr.
problem
Jayatilaka,
is that-
you could bring this argument in your final remarks. We have 3 minutes for each member. We have Deputy Minister Eran Wickramaratne, Attorney at Law Sheila Laktilaka, and Senior Political Analyst Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka as well. We start off with you. 3 minutes. Your time starts now. No new arguments could be brought forward.
The problem is not whether the government is afraid of an international inquiry or not. The problem is that after a 30-year war, no country which fought a war within its own borders against a terrorist foe and prevailed has submitted itself to an international inquiry by powers which have been bombing Vietnam using Agent Orange and have engaged in the rankest destruction possible throughout the third world. It's not a question of being afraid. It's a question of having a straight spine. It's a question of having national dignity. It's a question of defending your national sovereignty. It's a question of having a national identity. When a government, which is headed by somebody who signed a ceasefire agreement with one of the world's prime terrorists without bringing it to the cabinet, and then, according to Professor Paul Moorcroft, a former senior military instructor at Sanders, prevented the Sri Lankan Special Forces from assassinating Prabhakaran on Christmas Day in 2001, is in charge of matters, then you must pardon me for being somewhat apprehensive. So, in terms of the 100 days, there are good things, but the bad outweigh the good. And in terms of national sovereignty, in terms of national security, I find this situation very distressing. The removal of camps should not be in a manner that takes us back to the pre-war situation. A genocide resolution of 11 pages was passed by Chief Minister Vigneshwaran, and there's not a single political price, nothing that he has had to pay. He gave this to Jeffrey Feltman, the senior United Nations political official, to visit Sri Lanka. Now, the G word has been introduced into the bloodstream into the international community by the Northern Provincial Council. Chief Minister Vigneshwaran didn't dare do this when Mahinda Rajapaksa was president last year. Why bring a genocide resolution and pass it under a new administration? And what is the new administration doing about it? Not one political rebuttal of this kind of outrageous situation. So I would say it's 100 days of the positives, relaxation, liberalization, which you find when any new government is elected, but it's also 100 days of retrenchment in terms of our external relations. We have gone too far in the opposite direction. We have lost our sense of national dignity. We have allowed the escalation of the problem of reconciliation, because now in the north there's a sense that foreign leaders are on Sri Lanka's case and they're saying, let's do federalism, why don't you go beyond the 13th Amendment? David Cameron says we are committed, Sri Lanka should cooperate fully with the international inquiry. Nobody answers on behalf of Sri Lanka. John Kerry says the Sri Lankans waged 30 years of war against the Tamils, not a hum from Mangala Samaraweera. So in terms of national dignity and even in terms of ethnic reconciliation, we are now on the back foot. I find it morally outrageous that a Prime Minister who signed a CFA with the Tigers without showing the cabinet, that pulled off the LRRP team that was about to assassinate Prabhakaran, that raided the Millennium City in Aturugiriya, is able to posture as somehow more moral than the former president who liberated us from the Tigers. Now, Iran says that they are clearing up the mess. No, 30 years of war, only 4 years of Mahinda Rajapaksa's presidency, and he won that war. He cleared up the mess that Chandrika Baranayaka and Ranil Wickremesinghe and the UNP governments left him. That's what has happened. And I think it's morally outrageous for an unelected government headed by somebody who, if this were Europe, would have been facing a tribunal for treason, is on a witch hunt against those who saved the country from secession and terrorism.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka. Attorney at Law Sri Laktilaka. Bad outweighs the good.
Now, I want to tell this. Now, when we are living and we are going to live in a new era. New era led by President Maithripala Sirisena. Maithripala Sirisena, the president, is not a leader you can compare with the past leader. Like Oliver Cromwell, he is trying to give up his powers. So therefore, most important thing is his attitude. Attitude towards development, attitude towards governance, attitude towards society, attitude towards Sri Lanka. So when Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka talks about various apprehensions related to governance, I am going to answer those apprehensions with positive view. This is a presidential governance, not a prime ministerial governance. The foreign policy is formulated by the president. So therefore, we need not to worry whatever the lapses by individuals, but ultimately we are quite sure that the President Maithripala Sirisena will bring or usher this country into a new era. He is a common man's leader compared to any other leaders who have governed this country. So therefore I am positive. So with that note, the most important thing is in relation to foreign policy or governance or economic positioning, Sri Lanka has a potential. Unfortunately, when Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka is saying that the previous regime or the president has cleared up one mess, he has created or introduced another mess. So we are now preoccupied with removing that secondary mess. That is the foreign policy, the economic system, corruption, lawlessness, etc., etc. So therefore, compared to previous lawlessness or the corruption, the lethargy or inefficiency is progressive. I think Dr. Jayatilaka would understand that. Because we are coming from zero to another thing. So that is my view. So in relation to the country, we are heading for a new era. That is the message I have to say, that it would be very moderate, efficient. I mean, whatever the way you explain the good governance, the transparent, accommodative, responsive governance we could experience in near future. That is the message I have to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laktilaka. Over to you, Deputy Minister of Investment Promotion.
I would like to say at the outset a point that Dr. Dayan Jayatillaka referred to, that Chinese have surpluses and we need them as investments, and I completely agree with that. Our economic policy is not to exclude, but in the past, China's involvement with us as partners has been more in terms of debt, and we would like to increasingly see Chinese investment in this country, and we will welcome it like we would welcome investment from other parts of the world. On the issue of dealing with the aftermath of the war, I think there are situations here of reconciliation, there are situations of justice, and then there are situations of basically dignity and protecting national security and the sovereignty of the nation. And I think all this needs to be looked at in balance. As the President said in his speech last night to the nation, he said that on one hand, when that situation was there, private lands had to be acquired. Not just in the north, even in Colombo, next to the presidential house, next to the temple trees, lands had to be taken. But he asked the question, what's unjust about actually returning those lands to its original owners? Now, that is the approach that this new president has. It's an approach of reconciliation that the president has. He also said this. He said that I'm very mindful about the security of the country, and he is personally responsible as the Minister of Defense for the security of the country and the territorial integrity of the country. And therefore, I think we need to be a little careful. We go about bending this idea that we are removing all the camps in the north, which is not true. In fact, I was told by the Deputy Minister of Finance that no major camp has actually been removed. No major camp has been removed. And therefore, when we go about securing the sovereignty of the country, the territorial integrity, national security, there are ways and means of doing that. It's not just about land. It's about technology. It's about intelligence. And we will definitely strengthen those areas. We will not allow another Prabhakaran on our soil. And what is due to President Rajapaksa is due to President Rajapaksa in dealing with terrorism. And we will not take that away from President Rajapaksa. But I think we are not going to be scared to move beyond that. Justice needs to be done. And many people have suffered. They are looking for justice, and they are also looking for reconciliation. I think the idea that the Prime Minister, right, and the word was used that that he committed treason, I would like to completely reject that. There was an approach at that point. The approach was discussion. That was what the peace process was about. In history and in time, that was the appropriate approach at that time. And then it subsequently led, because of the intransigencies of the LTT, they had to be dealt with militarily. And that decision was right at that point in time. But at the previous point in time, what that Prime Minister and President Kumaratunga did was right at that point in time. I think that we need to move forward, not look backwards. We need that national reconciliation. A society is judged by how it treats its weakest. Minorities, by its very definition, are weaker. Our society will be judged by how we treat our minorities. We are working for a more human and a more democratic Sri Lanka. I am hoping that every parliamentarian will vote for the 19th Amendment, because it will strengthen democracy and the sovereignty of the people.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister of Investment, Promotion and Highways, Eran Wickramaratne, for joining us here on our show. Attorney at Law Shri Laktilaka, thank you very much for joining us. And our political analyst this evening, Dr. Dayan Jayatillaka, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for us, Sonali and also Naveen, for joining us right here on Face the Nation. I want to leave you tonight with a quote by Winston Churchill. He said, "We shall neither fail nor falter. We shall not weaken or tire. We will finish the job." The people of Sri Lanka are waiting, and the politicians should deliver. Next week, same time at 7:30 on MTV Sports, we will join you once again. Thank you very much.